Hello everyone, and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. Like I said, I'm going to be trying to get these done daily, which means I might end up having to record multiple in the same day. But for right now, well, I was going to talk about a different subject, but Ford basically jumped the line with their recent live stream. I wanted to talk about it because, we're starting to see more movement with the domestic automakers in terms of LFP batteries, which I sort of laid out with my discussion of the 2027 Chevrolet Bolt upcoming, and just the importance of LFP, the price difference, what we can expect in terms of pricing and in terms of economies of scale. Basically, everything I said about GM would apply to Ford too. And so I think there does need to be this growing emphasis on these lower cost electric vehicles, not just because they're going to sell in higher volumes, but also because I think based on what I'm seeing with the US economy, with the market, consumers are more strapped and more price sensitive now than they've ever been. And quite frankly, I think if American automakers want to survive, I think a majority of their portfolio is going to have to start shifting toward these $30,000 and under vehicles, and that goes for EVs as well, especially when we start to consider things like cost of ownership, lifetime cost of ownership, that sort of thing. So I think this is important to talk about, but I'll also say that I'm going to try really hard not to be critical of Ford. But one thing I just from the outset, just about the actual live stream format itself, it left me wondering, who is it even for, right? Because it seems like almost seems like the audience, or the intended audience, was actually Ford workers themselves, as though what they're mostly worried about, or what Farley is mostly worried about, is getting buy-in internally. And I saw a number of people comment basically that all of that live stream, and we still didn't see a prototype of this $30,000 mid-size EV truck that's going to be coming out in the next 2 years. And then of course the talking points were another area where I've been critical of Ford recently, because I feel like they've fallen too much into the Tesla groupthink trap, where it's kind of like influenced by Sandy Munro and other people like that, or Tesla influencers who basically say that if you're not operating like Tesla, if you're not recognizing Tesla as a industry leader, you're somehow behind or out of touch. And it feels like Ford has taken that a little too much to heart. And I have questions about whether that's actually valid, accurate, or true to begin with. The irony being, though, what Ford described with this shift, and with the Louisville plant being upgraded and their $4 billion worth of investments, they're really mirroring what GM is doing, right? So on one hand, they're talking about China, and they're talking about Tesla, and they're talking about, like I said, the points that someone like Sandy Munro was bringing up with, oh, don't use those fasteners, use these cheaper fasteners. Oh, redesign it so you're using a foot less coolant hosing here or whatnot. And some of those are valid, right? If you can limit material costs and production costs through planning, that's fine. It should not be at the cost of reliability or durability, and it shouldn't influence your ability to fix your vehicles, right? There shouldn't be a component that limits that, which we've seen from some of these other automakers, in particular Tesla, where repair costs, or Rivian too for that matter, where repair costs go through the roof because maybe it's cheaper to make it that way, but once it's made, it's far more expensive to repair something that's been broken or that's gone wrong. And so there was a lot of these verbal affirmations to that group, which it feels like is another target audience. Oh, I'm going to win over the Sandy Monroes. I'm going to win over the never not Tesla crowd, or I'm going to win over the, oh, we're looking at Chinese EV crowd. But again, it leaves me wondering, is that even who they should be targeting with their advertisements? And you know, something I don't talk about a lot on this channel is I actually come from a Ford owning family, right? In terms of when I bought my Chevy Volt, that was the first Chevrolet, right, anybody in my family had purchased in over 20 years. All of our trucks are Fords, all of our SUVs were Fords. I traded in a C-Max when I picked up my Chevrolet Bolt EV. So I did a little shifteroo and gave my family the Volt, which has now come back to me. In exchange, I traded in the Ford C-Max to buy my Chevrolet Bolt EV. So we've owned Fords. I still drive a 20-year-old Ford pickup truck. So I'm familiar with the brand. I'm not, you know, I don't have any sort of animosity toward it. And again, that's what I think makes me concerned about this proposal, is it's possibly falling on deaf ears, because it seems like Farley is trying to win over people who are already not in his camp and already aren't going to be Ford owners, right? So it's this constant grass is greener on the other side of the fence, rather than let's focus on what, you know, brought us to the table in the first place. What, you know, what Ford owners, or, you know, lifelong Ford owners, or Ford households are asking them to produce. So I'm a little bit leery based on the talking points, but like I said, what they did describe is essentially very similar to the plan that Mary Barra laid out in the Barclays presentation in November of 2017. So after sort of seeing the success of the Chevrolet Bolt EV when it first was released, they came up with a plan to do largely the same thing as what Farley was describing in the live stream, where, and I recently issued a correction on this, right? This Bolt EV that I'm sitting in is BEV3 chassis designation. The new EVs that GM is producing right now, formerly Ultium, are the BEV3 chassis designations. The larger vehicles are the BT1. I'm guessing it just means big truck one platform. I don't know. You'll have to ask GM. But they have these designations. And now Ford is talking about their Ford Universal EV platform. I just think FUEV. Is that what they're actually trying to say? I don't think so. And so this Ford Universal EV system that they're developing is very much in line, like I said, with what GM was doing. So while they're not really acknowledging GM in any way, they're basically following in GM's footsteps. And I think Farley had said that this was 3 years already in the making. And so by numbers, that would put them about 5 to 6 years behind GM. Not a place I think that they necessarily want to be, but where they benefit is they are leapfrogging in terms of it seems like going primarily with LFP batteries moving forward. And again, I've talked about this before, those have trade-offs. They have trade-offs in terms of range. They have trade-offs in terms of energy density. The best LFP batteries in the world right now are still 30 to 50% behind the best nickel-based batteries, primarily energy density. And we'll get to that too, where there are a lot of people who have decided that they are willing to give up range for faster charging speeds, which the Chinese automakers have proven that you can do, BYD, CATL, right, where you can get these 4C, 5C, 6C charging rates in LFP batteries that are allowing you to charge to 80%, 90%, 100% in 10 minutes or so. And if that's the case, right, that will fit right in line with what it looks like Ford is proposing. Farley was calling it Ford's next Model T moment, but realistically, and again, I hate to bring this back down to earth, what they're describing is Ford's BEV3, right? They're describing Ford's Ultium, even though they're not really, like I said, crediting GM in any way. They're speaking to, like I said, the Tesla audience almost, but they're doing what GM is doing. So it's almost like a tacit acknowledgement of that process. And again, I'm not going to argue with that. I think that's valid. I think it's maybe where they should have started with, but who's to argue with the fact that they brought an EV truck, a full-size EV truck to market faster than everybody else, because they did something very similar to what they did with the original Ford Ranger EV, which was take an existing truck chassis and reconfigure it to support a battery and electric motors, and it works, right? For a truck, it works. The Mach-E was a little bit more of a struggle for them, but realistically, the Mach-E was kind of their Chevrolet Bolt EV, if we want to talk about parallels. And this goes back to what I was saying is, based on the timelines and the overlaps, this Ford Universal EV, they're basically about 5 years behind GM, but they're on a very similar pathway, and they do have the potential to catch up. And I regret having to say behind, because it indicates a negative. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think it just took them longer to get to this point, which is fine. And I think this is the correct pathway for them, because they're, rather than working with LG like GM is, Ford is working with SK. That's where they're like their blue oval batteries. So they're on a very similar pathway, doing very similar things. And now they're both targeting low cost, cheap to own EV platforms, which I think is the correct decision. So I would say the single biggest criticism of the live stream is they were very short on details. We're still left wondering, and I guess that's fine if you want to sort of build up anticipation or whatnot. I feel like they could have sold a little bit more, showed a little bit more. Maybe they don't want to overpromise, but we'll see. I think these are positive moves for Ford, but we're still looking at a couple of years out. I'll also, since I hate it, since I'm being critical, the other thing too is they're still doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on these quad cab, basically throw a sedan on the back of a pickup truck, which in my opinion and in my experience compromises what a truck is supposed to be. I get that now it's sort of evolved to people using trucks as giant cars with a huge open air trunk that can pull big things. But seating 5 to 6 passengers in a pickup truck, yeah, that should maybe be an option, but it really should be the exception rather than the rule. Or if not, you need to be able to do something like what GM did with their midgate, or even like what Slate is proposing, where you can remove seats. Same thing that Bollinger did with their B1, where the seats were removable and you actually have. I think if you're going, even a mid-sized truck, if you're going to produce a truck at this point that has less than a 6-foot bed, you need to have a reason for it, and it can't just be because crew cab. That's just my hot take on it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Ford comes up with. Like I said, I was a little disappointed that the live stream was a bit light on details. I was left wondering who the audience was. I was left wondering what the detailed specs are. I think a lot of us EV nerds were there wondering, okay, we want to see a prototype and we want to see numbers and we want to see specifics, and all we get is $30,000 for a mid-size, what looks to be a crew cab truck. Okay, that's coming in 2 years. Hopefully we get more information. I'd love to hear what you think. Like I said, I'm worried that I'm a little bit too negative or a little bit too down on Ford, but in the EV timeline, I definitely think that under Fields, they dawdled a little bit too long on EVs and rushed to catch back up. And in doing so, I feel like they delayed their progress to the point where, like I said, I think they came to the realization that GM came to in 2017, but they came to it in like 2021 or something like that. I think that's, or 2022, that's when I think it really hit Ford that maybe they could have gone down that path of this new Model T path, this Ford universal EV platform. They maybe should have gone down that path earlier. So I'd love to hear what you think. Are you hot? Are you cold on the new Ford announcement? Did you have a chance to watch the live stream? Are you also peeved that they didn't actually show the prototype or give some more details from a customer perspective? Anyway, thank you for watching.